Well, good morning. Go ahead, take your Bibles, turn to the book of Mark as we continue just to walk through chapter by chapter, verse by verse, the Gospel of Mark. We are in chapter 5, starting in verse 21. We're going to look at the rest of chapter 5 this morning through verse 43 as all of this kind of story fits together. And I know I said last week I'm just going to jump right into the text, and I didn't. I'm actually going to do that this week as we continue to ask this question, as Mark is answering these several questions as he's laying out the life of Jesus, the truth of who Jesus is. He's continuing to answer who is Jesus and what has he come to do. And then obviously the next question is, how does that affect us? And Mark continues to use this word all throughout his gospel story immediately. That as he reveals something about Jesus, or God reveals something of himself, he does something in power, he speaks in authority, which we continue to say is not just him speaking as though he is wise or has this kind of just really enthusiastic ability to capture a room, but that he's actually speaking as though he is truth, like he's not appealing to another authority, like he is authority. He's demonstrating who he is through his miraculous works. He's revealing that he is the king that we long for, bringing the kingdom that we were created to live and dwell in with him forever. And as he does that, he immediately then says that there's a response to him. And we continue to see that. And this text this morning is just going to show us some incredible, incredible things as God wants to reveal something of his salvation. And he also wants to reveal something of his kingdom. So look with me, chapter 5, starting in verse 21. And if you don't have a Bible, the words will be on the screen, but we would love to actually give you one. And so in the lobby, there are stacks of Bibles. That's our free gift to you. We want everybody to have God's word. But chapter 5, verse 21. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so she may be made well and live." And he went with them. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. They're pressing up against him. Verse 25. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garment, I will be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body, notice this, that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples, and bless their hearts, were just like them though. Jesus, people are pressing up against you. What are you talking about? They say to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" They're like, everybody's touching you. Verse 32, and he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making such a commotion and weeping? This child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this. and told them to give her something to eat. Now, as we read this text immediately, right, we'll just continue with Mark's theme here. We recognize some things. There are two stories. There's really a grand story that feels like it's happening, and then a story that's stuck right in between that actually helps us understand everything that Jesus is trying to teach us in this entire passage. But both of these situations, we can kind of recognize right off the bat, seem like hopeless situations. Here's a man whose child is 12 years old and she is on her deathbed and he is at his wit's end, does not know what to do, and so he comes to Jesus. Here is a woman who has had a problem with bleeding for 12 years. She's gone and spent all of her money, gone to every doctor, tried every cure, and yet we see that she's suffering just as much from the cures for her disease as she is from the disease itself. Everything is just getting worse. Both of them are at a place where there is nothing in the world that they believe can help them. They are in hopeless situations. This is why commentators have often said about this portion of the book of Mark that it is kind of the St. Jude passage of the entirety of the New Testament. And if you grew up Catholic, really, really glad that you're here. If it makes you feel more comfortable, you can call me Father Brandon. But if you grew up Catholic, you know that St. Jude is the patron saint of hopeless causes and bringing hope to the hopeless. And this is why when Danny Thomas decided that he would start a hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, for those children that have so-called diseases that cannot be cured, that he would call it St. Jude's Hospital. And certainly when we read this text, we see these hopeless causes. They both fall into that category. Yet, what we're going to see is that Jesus wants to reveal something in the midst of this darkness. In the midst of this hopelessness, there is hope. There's only one hope, and Jesus is revealing that he is the true salvation and that his kingdom is the everlasting kingdom that we long for. And I absolutely just love the way that he lays this out. Guys, this text is so beautiful. And it's so much deeper than if you just have enough faith, God will heal you of a physical ailment. There's something that's happening here that is so far beyond the physical. See, every single one of us, yes, we have physical needs for healing, and yes, God does heal physical things. I've seen it happen. It's happened in my life. It's happened to friends' lives. But sometimes, even though we have faith in God and all that he can do, just like with Paul in his letters, who went to God 3 times in prayer asking to be healed, and the answer that God gave him was, sometimes you will be healed, and other times his grace is sufficient. See, it doesn't have, this passage is about if we have enough faith, we will be healed physically. There's something far more deep going on here, and it's the reality that, yes, we have physical needs, but everything physical points to a spiritual reality. And we have a spiritual need at the foundation of our lives for salvation and the kingdom that we were created to be in. And Jesus reveals it through these 2 beautiful, incredible, interesting story. So look back in verse 21. Here we see that Jesus has come back from across the sea. And so if you've been here the last couple of weeks, you know that in chapter 4 and early in chapter 5, Jesus has been teaching. He's been performing miracles, and he decided that he was going to go from Jewish territory across the Sea of Galilee to Gentile territory. He has just been teaching about the kingdom of God and how it's for all people. We're going to see that again in this text. But he goes over to the Gentile side. In the midst of the journey there's a crazy hurricane-like storm that he calms. He demonstrates that his power is over everything in creation, and his love is deeper than anything that we could possibly imagine, and that when we are with him, we can trust his power and his love. We might not understand everything that takes place in our lives or around us, but we know that we can trust him. He gets over to the other side of the sea, and there's a demonized man who is a representation of evil, and Jesus displays that his power is over all evil, and his love is great enough to restore and to redeem even those that are in the darkest places of life. He comes back over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee into Jewish territory, and he begins to gather a crowd, as is pretty usual for him. Everywhere that Jesus goes, a crowd is there. They want to be healed. They want to hear him speak with authority. They want to understand who he is and what he's done. The question is there, is this the Messiah that we have waited on? What kind of kingdom is he going to build, and what kind of king is he going to be? And Jesus continues to put on display that he's come for a greater kingdom than a kingdom of the earth. And he is a greater king than a king that will rise and fall. He continues to display this, but crowds continue to come around him. And one of the rulers of the synagogue hears that Jesus has come back across the sea. And so he goes to see Jesus. Jairus is his name. Now, here's something that we need to know about synagogue rulers. They're not rabbis, but they are those in the synagogue in the first century that hold a very high position in the religious tradition. They would oversee the synagogue building. They would oversee service and how the service works and just kind of buildings and grounds. They just kind of take care of the synagogue. So they're very important. Everybody in the town knows who they are. They're pretty wealthy. And so they're kind of the higher side of society. They have a lot of respect. He would be very well known and very well off and very respected. And here comes Jesus, and he's going to Jesus. And here's what we need to know in light of knowing what a synagogue ruler is. This man is not coming to Jesus because he is a religious leader who's really excited to have this rabbi come into town. We already know that the religious leaders are coming up against Jesus. They're confused by his teaching because they're teaching religious tradition, and they're teaching that you do these things to please God. And here comes Jesus, and he's actually teaching that he has come as God to do what you cannot do on your behalf, to lay his life down to pay the penalty of your sin, to rise from the grave, to defeat everything that is defeating us, to bring us back into community, God, by his grace, through his work, through our faith, and that there's nothing that we can do to be saved, but only what Jesus has done for us saves us, and by his grace, we can be healed and brought back into communion with God, to dwell with him in his kingdom. And this is directly against the religious idea, I have to do to become. And see, this rubs the religious leaders the wrong way. Because we've said before, life and just in the natural way that we think of things in a two-way street. If I do these things, I deserve these things. If I please God, then he should do good for me. And if I don't please God, I feel guilt and shame. We understand a two-way street. And we desire to kind of thrive in that way, either religiously or irreligiously. And a lot of times we even think if I come to Jesus, or I give my life to Jesus, or I become a Christian, quote unquote, then I've got to give up all of these things that make me happy. And what Jesus is actually proclaiming is that you're not giving anything up. You are gaining salvation and life and the identity that you were created to know and to have. You're gaining the kingdom that you were created to be a part of. And what begins to happen is that we begin to understand truly who we are, why we were created, what we're created to do. And we can begin to walk in the freedom of our true identity in Christ. And so we're not giving anything up, but what we discover, and we've often likened it to love, when you fall in love, all of a sudden you're wanting to do things you never wanted to do before. And you passionately are pursuing those things, and you're willing to not do things that you used to do, and you're doing things that you used to make fun of other people for doing, but you don't care. It's worth all of the risk in the world for anybody to think of you what they want to think of you, because you have discovered something that has made you truly greater. It's given you a life and a love that you long to experience. And when we come to Jesus, it is far beyond anything we can experience on planet Earth. It's what we were created to know. And he begins to transform our lives with new passions and new desires. And so we long to glorify and to honor him, because this is where our joy is. And it's worth the risk to live our lives completely surrendered to him, because it's greater than anything that we could possibly accomplish or do. He shifts our desires, our wants, our longings. But for the religious leaders, this is not good. It takes their leadership away. It takes their respect away. At least they believe so. And so they have been looking for ways to trap Jesus. And so this religious leader is not coming to Jesus because he wants to ask Jesus to come and speak at the synagogue. He's coming to Jesus for one reason and one reason only. There's only one reason that he would, because he's actually risking his reputation by coming to Jesus. And a Jewish man in his stature would not come to Jesus. He would be trying to trap Jesus, and he definitely would not bow down on his knees before another Jewish man. He's risking everything of his livelihood to come to Jesus, but he's doing it for one reason. He is in the middle of a seemingly hopeless situation. There's nothing that he can do. His 12-year-old daughter is lying on her deathbed, and there's no way for her to be saved. There's no way, barring a miracle, barring him going to the one who he has heard can redeem and heal and set free of illness. And so he is willing to lay everything aside, everything that he is, everything he's built his life on. Tradition makes no difference. Religion makes no difference. The law makes no difference. Reputation makes no difference. Because my daughter is about to die. I will do anything to save her, and I am in a hopeless crisis. If you've been a parent, and certainly there are other things in our lives that kind of bring the same emotion up. But if you've been a parent, you intimately would understand, and this is why I relate so well to Jairus. He's in a hopeless situation. And most of us have come to different times in our lives when maybe we feel completely helpless or hopeless. And there are situations that we come about in our lives that we have to face where even the most powerful of people become really weak. The most confident of people just are completely humiliated. There are different situations that come in our life where we just feel that we are so capable and we can do anything that life throws at us. We can handle it, but then suddenly that one thing comes and we go from feeling capable to helpless. Anytime we find life in something, we love something so deeply, and the threat of it being taken away and there's nothing that we can do about it. When these types of situations come into our lives, we will find ourselves feeling helpless, powerless, begging for mercy, whatever we believe can help us. Whatever we believe can bring healing. And we've all had these types of situations, and certainly we've seen them throughout the book of Mark. Last week, we saw that a demonized man comes and bows down before Jesus. He had come to a place in his life and his heart where there's nothing else that can possibly help me. There's nothing that I have hope in. There's nothing that can save me. There's nothing that can heal me. There's nothing that can transform me. And so this man bows down before Jesus in belief that he alone can bring healing. Then we see this week the religious man, the total opposite, the irreligious last week, the religious this week, bowing down before Jesus. Because listen to me, there's nothing on this earth that in the situation you find yourself in of truly seeking hope and meaning in life that will be able to give you what it promises you. And every knee eventually will bow before Jesus, who is the King of Kings and who is the Lord of Lords and who did come to save you and who did come to do what is required for you to have salvation and did come to bring you new life and did come to bring you into community with him and did come to reveal the kingdom that you were created to long and live in. And he alone is the one that when we go before helpless, hurting, confused, unable to save ourselves, then when we bow down and surrender to him, salvation comes. He alone, though, can save. We often will say here that you need 4 things to be able to live. You need food, yes, water, shelter, but you also need hope. You also need hope. And there's only one that brings a true hope. And as we go through this story this morning, I know that, especially in our culture today, it's hard to feel this desperate. We always feel like in America that we have some other option. And that causes us to constantly feel like there's always another door open. And we're going to see that in our text this morning. There's always this worldly type of hope. But that hope is just nothing is working, but there's another door. It's not a sure hope. It's not a true hope. Many of you are hoping this morning, I hope that I can find life. I hope that I can find what I need. And I see the next door. And you've got this false sense of hope. But once you go through that door, if it's anything in the world that you're seeking for salvation that can only come in Jesus, then it too will close behind you and you will still feel hopeless. So there are these worldly senses of hope, but Jesus is the only one who brings an everlasting hope, who brings salvation, who transforms our lives, who promises, and because of who he is and what he has done, we know that his promises are true. He'll reveal that in this text this morning, that we can trust in and we can have a sure hope in. In him alone can we have a life that thrives, that's actually thrilling, that's everything that you've ever dreamed of and longed for. But it doesn't always come the way that you thought it would. And we're going to see in both of these situations that neither one of these people get what they ask. And when we come to Jesus, it's always far more uncomfortable than we ever wanted it to be, but he does something far better than we ever even believed was possible. And see, here's what we see in this text, that Jesus is our only hope, as this one comes to him, Jairus, this religious leader of the synagogue, and he begs Jesus for help. And in this moment, this man has circumstances that are truly allowing his heart and his mind to be most vulnerable. And my prayer for us this morning is that we would be able to find and understand the reality of where we actually are in our hopelessness without Jesus. And our hearts and minds would be vulnerable to seeing him as our Savior. This is where this man is. So because Jairus alone has a daughter that he loves, he's willing to give everything. He's willing to pay any kind of cost. And he hears that Jesus is in town. And so he goes to Jesus, the hope for healing and redemption and restoration in his hopelessness. He wants to find hope in him. And I mentioned that if you have kids, you can really kind of sympathize with this. And certainly there are other things in our lives. And I really connect with Jairus in this situation. I have two little girls. I have three kids. Two girls are oldest, 10 and 8. My son Judah is 6. And the girls, I'm not going to lie to you, when I found out that our first two were going to be girls, I was a little bit nervous. One of them's in here listening to me, and so I'm going to get a lot of questions after this. But I was a little bit nervous. And because I felt that growing up a boy and turning into a man, I could father a son. Like, I felt like I kind of knew what I was going to do, which you don't know, right? But the only people who think that they know how to parent are people who do not have kids. Like, I can tell you that the only people that ever give you parenting advice that's unsolicited are people who don't have kids, right? We have everything figured out until we actually have kids. But I thought that I could manage a son. And then when I ended up having two girls, I thought to myself, I'm a little bit nervous about this because I don't know how to raise girls. But through all of that, and much because of who they are, and God's just design and plan, I've come to a place of understanding where it is an absolute honor and privilege to be a girl dad. To raise girls up, to know Jesus, to love Jesus, to honor God in everything that they are. And sons are amazing too, but here's what I find. They're different. Like you just end up fathering in a different way. Sons are incredible. I have so much fun with my son. He's very independent. He kind of finds it very difficult to listen. He thinks he knows everything as a 6-year-old. But he's fun, and I can kind of, have fun with him, and we can joke around, and I try to teach him things and those kinds of things, and how to be both tough and tender, and how to lead a family, and all of these different kinds of things. But when it comes to the girls, they're completely different. And I've begun to realize that I have to father them in a different way, and it's a blessing and an honor. But there are nuances to how you father boys and girls. And being the dad of girls, I've found to be very precious because they've taught me so much that I never knew before. My wife and I talk all the time about how they have softened my heart. And even in the way that I used to teach and to preach, of just very aggressive. Some of you might think that it's still that way, but just very different. But now, because of my girls, I've become much more tender. I'm not naturally somebody who kind of feels the empathy of other people. I feel just very apostolic by nature, so I want to do what's next. I want to know what's next. I just want to chase after it. I have a very hard time celebrating anything good that happens, and I just want to move on to the next thing, but they've allowed me to slow down and to realize the beauty of life. And they've done so many things for me just because of their innocence and their softness of heart and their genuineness and their dependency. When they get hurt or when they need something, they come to me and they say something like, "I need you, Daddy." My son is the complete opposite. He needs nothing from me, he thinks, right? And so I have to hold him down to help him and give him what he needs. But my girls, there's just genuinely something about them that really reveals a part of God to me that sons don't do for me. There's this beauty that God allows for girls to demonstrate to the world and to their dads and to their moms. And I've loved kind of coming to an understanding of these things in some way, though I'm still learning a lot. And one thing that I've learned about girls, and this isn't just with my girls, but just in counseling and coming across so many different relationships and families and family dynamics, one thing that I've noticed is that a daughter and a dad, they have this really special bond. And daughters put on display, maybe better than anything else on planet Earth, an unconditional love for their dad. A hope that just surpasses all understanding for their dad. When everybody else has given up on him, when nobody else loves him, when he doesn't deserve love, there's still love from a daughter. So often. And it's just unexplainable. There's still a hope that he's going to turn it all around and God is going to get a hold of him and everything is going to, there's this unconditional love. There's this special bond that they have. This love that they put on display. And so they've taught me so much, and because of that, it has become to me a real joy and a real honor and a real feeling of responsibility for me to garner that really well, for me to really love them, to comfort them, to come alongside of them, to let them know how beautiful they are and how proud of them that I am and how I wouldn't want to be anybody else's dad. And I want to come alongside of them and comfort them. I want them to know that because I'm here, everything is going to be okay. I want to hold them when they are scared. I want to help them when they are struggling. And raising boys is just a little bit different. Even though it is a blessing, you will never hear me tell my girls, "Hey, you just need to toughen up a little bit in this situation." It's going to come out a whole lot more like, "Who did what to you? Where are they?" Right? It's just a little bit different. There are nuances to this. And I take that, and men, listen to me, if you have a daughter, we need to take that as a beautiful, beautiful responsibility. There's something that our daughters long for in us. And if it isn't there, daughters, believe me, Jesus is going to reveal something really beautiful about this whole redemptive story. But fathers, we need to love our girls like a father should love his girl. We need to comfort them and be there for them and love them and let them know how beautiful they are and how proud of them we are. They need to feel protected and cared for and loved and comforted and adored and like you are going to make everything okay. And so when I read this story and I look that Jairus has a 12-year-old daughter, I think to myself, man, he just wants to protect her. He wants to care for her. He wants to make everything okay. He wants to love her well. He has dreamed of a future with her. He's held her during storms. He's read bedtime stories to her as she has grown up. And now every plan for the future and everything that he has comforted her in, all of that, her life is at the brink of being gone. She's lying on her deathbed. And so Jairus, he finds Jesus, and this is one of those moments of complete hopelessness because he probably left her with her mom knowing he needs to hurry, knowing he might not make it back, and everything in him just wants to be with her when that moment happens, but he knows that there's one more hope, and so he maybe leans down to her, touches her on the forehead, kisses her on the forehead, and he says, hey, Daddy is going to go and do everything he can to bring you healing. And he runs to Jesus and he gets down on his knees. And maybe this gives us a little bit of a better picture of why he does what he does. He gets on his knees and he begs for Jesus to heal her. There's no other hope. I am in a hopeless situation. And here's this beauty. Jesus says yes. And they begin to walk to Jairus' house. And this is the part of the story where Jairus, in his mind, he has to be feeling at least this worldly kind of hope. Like, there was no hope, now the door's open. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how this is all going to go down, but I've got a glimmer of hope in my mind because there is a next door. There's something that has opened up. There's some type of opportunity, and we're going to see by the time he gets to the end of the story, there is a true hope that we can begin to understand. But in this moment, there's got to just be at least this glimmer of hope. There's another door open. But then as they're walking towards his house, Mark breaks in with this other story that just completely interrupts the story that we just started. But it's all going to work together to reveal something of Jesus' salvation and his kingdom, and it's something that we desperately need as we sit here today, and it's something that they needed in the first century. So as the crowd is pressing up against him, they're all kind of walking with Jesus as Jesus is going to Jairus' house. Suddenly, a woman interrupts the entirety of what is taking place. All of us, when we're reading this story, all we want is for Jesus to get to Jairus' house, for Jesus to touch the little girl, for the little girl to be healed. Yay, physical healing. This is amazing. This is incredible. And then this woman comes into play almost like she gets in the way. She interrupts the process of healing. While Jesus is walking through the crowd, he's touched, but it's by a particular woman with a particular faith. And this particular woman with this particular faith, it causes him to stop and give us a story within the story that we desperately need. Now, as we're looking at the whole thing, we can see that this woman has an issue of bleeding that she's had for 12 years. There's some connection there that we don't have time to get into with a 12-year-old girl and a woman who's had an issue for 12 years. There's beautiful imagery all throughout Scripture. And while this sounds really bad to us, so this woman has struggled with this disease for 12 years, there's no healing, she's spent everything that she has, we also need a little bit of understanding of what would take place in the first century. Because if we go back to Levitical law and we read the book of Leviticus, then what we discover in Levitical law is that this woman, because of this disease, would be considered unclean. And what this means is that for 12 years, she's been unable to go into a place of worship. For 12 years, she's been unable to be touched. For 12 years, she's probably eaten every meal alone. If you were to touch her, you would have to go through a religious ritual of 7 days to become clean again. And so this woman is a complete outcast in society. Nobody has hugged her. Most people do not speak to her. She does not have a dad like Jairus to seek help for her. She is all alone. And it would be against the law for her to even make her way through this crowd of people and touch them. She's making all of them unclean. It would be against the law for her to touch a rabbi like Jesus. So she is suffering physically and socially and religiously. And then Mark goes even a step deeper to help us understand her situation, that she has spent everything that she has seeking healing. And she has found everything to be hopeless. And listen, if you're trying, as we said, to find spiritual hope, which is the foundation of everything that you were created for and long for with anything in this world. I don't care what it promises. Your cures will hurt you just as much as your suffering. There's no hope in them. So when she, like Jairus, hears that Jesus has come, she is willing, like Jairus, to throw everything to the side, to risk it all. I don't care about any social acceptability. I don't care about law. I don't care if I get yelled at. I don't care if I have rocks thrown at me. I don't care who I make unclean, because there is one hope, and I am going to pursue this one hope. Listen, let me submit to you this morning, there are only two reasons that you would act like this in our culture today or any culture that ever has been. One is you truly feel like you have no hope and you are in desperate need. When you have no hope and you are in desperate need, you will throw everything to the side. You will risk it all for what you believe will give you hope. The only other way that you will do this is if you have a greater hope than anything you could lose in the world. That I have found Jesus, that I have salvation in him. He set me free to live the way that I was created to live. I don't need the things of the world to define who I am. I don't need everything that I could accomplish to be loved and to be cared for, because in him I have everything, and that frees me to live the way that I was created to live and to see every circumstance through the lens of who I am in him. I have true freedom, and therefore I don't care what the world thinks. I will put on display where hope is. I will put on display where salvation is. This is why these two reasons that we're actually willing to risk it all and to find what we're looking for. This is why for most of us in our culture today, we're willing to just go along to get along. We're willing to even believe and say things we know to be untrue. Because again, it's very hard for us to feel this desperate in the culture that we live in. And for many of us, we have not found the hope that's willing to risk it all for. But what we find here in this text is that these two have no hope, and so they're willing to risk it all. And by the end of the story, they will understand a greater hope than anything that they could find in the world, and they are willing to risk it all. And they are actually able to live the life that they were created to live. We see this beauty in the text, but this woman, just like Jairus, she's at the end of her rope. She doesn't care what might happen. And so she gets to Jesus. But just like Jairus, as I said, she doesn't get what she expected. See, it's always far more uncomfortable. We always get more than we ever thought was possible when we come to Jesus. She just thinks, I'm going to kind of sneak in. Nobody will probably even notice me. Like, I'm going to just reach in the crowd, tug on the corner of his robe or his prayer shawl, and I'll be healed. And then I can just slip back into life and live it the way that I want to live it. I just need Jesus to heal me. And she's probably thinking of a superstition or a legend that was going around in the first century. It goes all the way back to Numbers chapter 15, when God told Moses that the Israelite people were to make prayer shawls or robes that had four corners, and on them had to be 613 tassels that were covered in a blue yarn type of material. And the 613 tassels represent the 613 laws of the Old Testament, and it was worn to remind the people that they were to live for the glory of God, to honor him in everything that they did, to remind him of God's law until the Messiah comes. And many Orthodox Jews still wear them to this day. It's mentioned all throughout the Old Testament. The last place that it's mentioned is in Malachi chapter 4, the last book of the Old Testament before Jesus comes, in chapter 4. And it says in Malachi, it gives a warning to judgment that is coming if you're not placing faith in honoring God. But then it says that a Messiah will rise up and healing will be in his rays. And the word rays there in Hebrew is the same word used back in the book of Numbers to describe the tassels or the corners of the prayer shawl or robe that would have been worn. And so there was this legend that sprung up in the first century that when the Messiah comes, there will be healing power in his robe. All you have to do is touch the robe. And so maybe this was her idea. I just want to get in there and touch the robe, and then I can sneak back out. Nobody even has to know. If I'm healed, fantastic, I'll live my life. If not, well, it was just another thing that I tried. But maybe this was the idea, and while it does show that she has a confused theology, I think it also shows why Jesus stopped. In a crowd of people, to the disciples' point, where everybody's touching you, why does Jesus stop for this one? And yes, this shows that maybe she has some confused theology on salvation and healing and who God is and what he's come to do and what that means for her. But it does show that she believes he's the Messiah. If I can just touch his robe, I'll be healed. And this is why Jesus stops. This is the faith that he's talking about. So he turns around to the crowd and says, "Who is it that touched me?" Verse 29. And when she did, instantly the bleeding stopped. And it's not just, it doesn't just give off this impression that the bleeding just stopped and she was healed, but the word for power that is used is dunamis, and it's the word where we get the word dynamite. So when the power comes out of Jesus into her, it's like this dynamic thing happens. There's this explosion where everything diseased, sinful, broken, leading to death leaves her body, and everything that is new, salvation, life-giving comes into her body, and she feels it. There's something new that's happened. Something didn't just leave me. Something came into me. And this is huge for Jesus to reveal. He wants her to understand it's not the shawl that healed you, it's me that you need. He doesn't want this woman just to fade off into the distance thinking, I touched the shawl and now I'm healed. Because see, Jesus did not just come to bring physical healing, but he came to have relationship with his people. He's going to actually give a face to the touch. And so he turns around and he says, "Who touched me?" in verse 30. And of course, the disciples are like, "What do you mean? Everybody's touching you." But Jesus knows that something touched him in a different way, that there was a faith there that wasn't just a faith that he can physically heal me. This person isn't just trying to use Jesus like maybe everybody else in the crowd, but this person believes that I am the one that I say that I am. There wasn't just physical healing power, but there was a soul-saving kind of belief, of faith. And I say this because this text is actually likened to when Jesus is on the cross. And while Jesus is dying on the cross for our sin, his power actually takes on the sin of those who will believe. And he feels the weight of our sin and brokenness in that moment, and our unrighteousness and our uncleanliness. And all of that is exchanged through his power for his cleanliness and his righteousness. And this moment is a foreshadowing of that moment. This is a picture of how salvation comes into our lives, and we are brought into community with God. So she touches him, but rather than both of them becoming unclean, she becomes clean because of who he is and because of what he's come to do. See, this doesn't work in anything else on planet Earth. How many of you have ever had children that are sick and you come to drop them off in the kids area with all the well kids because if they spend an hour with them, maybe they'll be well? None of you. Right? We do the opposite. Our child is sick. We don't want to put them in with all the well kids because they're going to make all the kids who are not sick. See, we understand this in life. This is what the Israelites understood. When something unclean touches something clean, it becomes unclean. But what happens when we come to Jesus is that through his power, he makes everything that is unclean clean. He brings salvation. He's the only one who can make everything that is unclean righteous and clean and holy. Only Jesus can do this. And he wants to reveal this, so he calls her out. And in verse 33, she comes out of the crowd with fear and trembling. Now, remember Jairus. We're going to close up in just a couple of minutes going back to him. But remember, he's just kind of standing over there this whole time. He's thinking to himself, we don't have time for this. And who knows how long this is taking? Like she touches, Jesus turns around. How long is he scoping the crowd? How long is this woman kind of standing in the background going, I ain't going to come forward? And then it says she comes with fear and trembling and tells the whole story. How long does that take? And Jairus is standing over there thinking to himself, we don't have time for this. Jesus, you said that you were going to come to my house. You said that you were going to heal my daughter. She's on her deathbed. I made a promise. I'm a dad. I want to comfort her. I want to be with her. So Jesus calls this woman out because there's something more important happening here. There's something that Jesus needs us to see. And she comes forward and she tells the whole story, and we get this beautiful answer to a question. What happens when you are completely exposed and completely surrendered to the God of the universe? Look what Jesus says in verse 34. Daughter, I'm the Father that comes for you. I'm the one that protects you. I'm the one that loves you and that cares for you. I'm the one that makes you feel beautiful because of who I created you to be. I'm the one that's proud to call you a son or a daughter because of my work for you. There's nothing that you can do to make me love you more, and there's nothing that you can do to make me love you less. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. And listen, this isn't a faith made you well. If you have enough faith, you'll get well. As we said at the beginning, this is you have faith in me. The word faith there is the same word used throughout the New Testament for the word salvation. What he's saying is, your belief in who I am has saved you. And this is a physical representation of what I do spiritually for everyone who comes to me. And now you can go in peace. You can go and risk it all to give glory and honor to your God. Hold people in your arms. Reveal the love of God that has been revealed to you. You can go and live the life that you were created to live. Go in freedom, because now you have salvation and life and eternity in me. Listen, so many of us, like this lady who comes to him, we just want to touch. Like, I just want to get kind of close to God. I need some direction, like maybe a little bit of his power, love for him to heal me. I just want to kind of touch, and then I'm going to fade back into the crowd. I'm going to find another Christian when I need somebody to pray for me. I'm going to come to church when I feel like I need it, like I need a pick me up. Like, I just want to touch. I need some direction. I just want to touch, but listen to me, God never allows that. He has more for you. It's uncomfortable, but he wants to know you. He wants to set you free. He wants you to live the life in him that you were created to live and can only have in him. See, our sinful condition is just like this woman. It separates us from God. It makes us an outcast. And no matter what we do and where we go and what resources and talents we exhaust, we will never find hope. It's all in Jesus. And then Jesus turns to Jairus, and we'll close with this. Really quickly, we need to see the second part of it. Again, imagine his feeling. Like, as soon as he sees this happen, there's got to be mixed emotion, right? Because he just came and asked Jesus for something Jesus just did. So immediately, he's not coming to Jesus anymore, bowing down, begging, God, can you please do this? I've heard that you do these things, but now he's like seeing Jesus just do what he wants Jesus to do for his daughter. So there's more hope. There's a next level kind of hope. Like, I know this open door can actually do what I want it to do. But as soon as he feels that emotion, some people from his household come to him and say, hey, don't bother the teacher anymore. Your daughter's dead. And think about that. Like, he immediately realizes, I didn't do it. I didn't make it. And not only that, not that that's not bad enough, but I could have been there with her when she passed. I could have held her hand. I could have kissed her cheek. I could have told her I wouldn't trade a moment that I've had with you over the last 12 years for anything else on planet Earth. And I love you and I'm proud of you. And he could have held her hand into eternity, but he missed it because he wanted to provide for her. And so in this moment, he's got to feel confused, maybe angry at the woman for coming in and kind of disrupting, maybe frustrated with Jesus. Why did you even stop? But here's what we see in verse 36 and following. Jesus comes over to him and says, don't fear, have faith. And here's what Jesus is saying there. Again, not have enough faith and I'll bring your daughter back to life. But here's what Jesus is saying. I told you I would come with you. I said yes. And I am faithful to fulfill my promises. And so Jesus not only wants to reveal something of salvation, but also something of his kingdom and what is to come. And so he says to Jairus, let's go to your house. And verses 38 through the end of the text, Jesus goes to the house and there are people there wailing and mourning. These are paid mourners. This would happen in the first century, and depending on how much you made, depending on how many mourners you would have that were professionally paid to come and cry and to scream and to yell. So these people are around death. They know what death is. And Jesus says, hey, stop crying. She's not dead. She's just sleeping. And they laugh at her because they know that she's dead. And so Jesus, understanding, he uses this term sleep, and it's this term that's often used in the New Testament for somebody who's a follower of Jesus, who passes physically, but Jesus is returning again to revive us, to make us new in him, to bring about a new heaven and a new earth where there will be a rising of us, a resurrection and new life in him, where we live under his kingship and his kingdom for all of eternity, where everything is made new, every tear is wiped away, every disease is gone, everything is full of joy in his glory. And the time in between that, oftentimes those who are writers of Scripture will call falling asleep. And this is the term that Jesus uses. And he walks in. Peter, James, and John are there because discipleship is often caught, not taught. He wants them to see his heart and what he does. And he walks in and he takes her hand. And he says, little girl. It's a term of endearment. It's like if I was to walk into my little girl's room in the morning and say, hey, sweet girl, it's time to get up. He says, honey, sweetheart, arise. He takes her hand and he says, arise. And immediately she has life. And everyone is amazed. And Jesus has just revealed he has physical power over death and the enemy and evil and everything that is created, but there's something deeper happening. This is what he actually does for each of us who place our faith in him. This is the gospel being lived out physically. He takes our death. He overcomes our rebellion and sin. And in him, we get new life. And one day, if we have placed our faith in him, we will awaken from sleep. And we will see his face. And we will sense his presence. Every tear will be wiped away. Everything will be made new. And we will be in his perfect kingdom with our perfect king for all of eternity. I love how he says, give her something to eat. Because when we rise in him, there is a feast that is coming in our forever kingdom with our forever king. And see, we can be like this woman today, hopeless in all of our own ways, but we can be saved because he came to die. And we can be like this young girl who was risen from the dead because he rose to defeat sin and death. And listen to me. This hope is worth risking everything for.